council, majority of council unified to put forth a legislative agenda or what is our legislative priorities coming forth this year. And I certainly want to welcome Councilor at Large Mike Green. Certainly want to welcome. This is a collaboration, and Councilor Driscoll, our majority whip, will speak next. But this is a collaboration of ideas between all of the councilors on priorities, whether it's relative to policy across the board or our respective districts. And with that, I'll turn it over to Councilor Driscoll.
Thank you. Thank you to President Hudson, President Pro Tem, Councilor Bay. So as he said, there's been a lot of more communication among the council this year, a lot of taking time outside of our council hours to get together and discuss the issues, and we've been able to come together and discuss what are our priorities for the year moving forward. One that's more administrative when in discussion with the council. We've also, this isn't on the list because it's more of the administration, but we've all made clear that housing in the city remains a priority for the council, and that code enforcement in particular and the implementation of codes is also been a priority for the council when working with the administration. But these are initiatives we've decided that are going to be a priority for the year to come. I'll just go through them really quickly. Independent redistricting. We're very proud that with the leadership of President Hudson, Syracuse is going to be the first city in the Northeast to have independent redistricting by a third party. In many cases, we have elected officials deciding who their constituents will be and who their voting public should be, and we believe that power should be with the voting public. The new lead ordinance, we've had a lot of pieces about that, addressing lead poisoning, and that's another reason why code enforcement has been so important to the council, because this is one of the many problems that we've heard about from our constituency. Reviewing business license fees, Councilor Green has been very active in seeing what licensing fees are relevant and which ones aren't, and trying to clarify and streamline that process. A moratorium on the sale of city-owned lands and vacant lands to nonprofits is something that Councilor Bay and Councilor Allen have been championing. We're very aware that most of our a large portion of our city is tax exempt through both the universities and hospitals and other nonprofit entities, and we feel that it's really hurt the tax base in the city, so we want to do a comprehensive look at how we interact with the nonprofits and the space that they're occupying. Seeking outside counsel, common council attorney. The council has always had room in its budget to seek an outside attorney, and we haven't really exercised that right or really explored putting out an RFP to an independent counsel that the common council could speak to for advancing legislative goals or reviewing certain legal aspects of initiatives we want to take in the city. So that's another one of our goals. The last few are working with the state and federal in the form of resolutions, and a memorial resolution asking the state agree to sell or transfer all the ownership of the land that New York State owns to the city of Syracuse in relation to the Route 81 viaduct. This is something that many of us visited Rochester and saw on the Interloop project that was a possibility for the state working with the city of Rochester, and we feel that it's a crucial step in having some say and autonomy about how we want that corridor to be developed. Public officers law, that's something all the councilors have spoke about. Separating upstate cities from New York City, allowing the city of Syracuse to obligate public safety and sanitation workers who are employed by the city of Syracuse to have a residency requirement and to live within the city. And the last initiative, the street code water for the recreational use of embalming fluid, making that officially illegal, and classifying embalming fluid as a Schedule A narcotic when possessed by unlicensed person, as it's been used as a recreational substance in certain areas. So with that being said, any other comments, President Hudson, President Bay?
No, I just think, well, no, I always say that, but I just think this is a good first step for us as a council to basically look at how we're going to work legislatively and how we're going to actually work, as Councilor Pro Tem said, to move the city forward. Because again, we have constituents that depend on us to talk about a lot of things we're talking about now. The lead, the business licenses, the not-for-profits. So we have community always talking about this to us, and we're finally putting this into action. So I just want to applaud the council and say thank you to each and every one of you that we're finally moving forward with our legislative agenda. Councilor Bay?
I'm ready for questions, comments, jokes, but jokes got to be funny.
Any questions from the press? Any?
How much does this differ, or is it similar to the administration's priorities? Might you recommend something different?
Well, one thing that is similar, and one thing that we removed because it was already spoken about, the council was already giving consideration to a sidewalk, municipal sidewalk program, and so it worked out that it was equally on a priority, or became a priority of the administration. And so there are obviously you have that issue, which is a very big issue. I think we had one issue a couple of years ago or more where this really came to a head, where one property owner had got hit with a $17,000 bill, and I believe it was a senior citizen who got hit, because the sidewalks were condemned. Mm-hmm. But some of these ideas, these issues are not even relative to the administration necessarily, but they're issues that's been around for a long time, and whether, lead obviously is a joint effort. Independent redistricting is a legislative effort. When you talk about the reconsidering business license fees, that would have to be or become a joint effort, but the council ultimately determine fee structures and the like in the city, or makes the vote on those. The moratorium on nonprofits, I've been arguing this for a long time, that we have to make better use of our land resources. 501c3s or nonprofits were a smart idea, but the intent of nonprofits were to engage in business that government couldn't legally, or because we couldn't because of lack of resources and the like. Nonprofit was intended to be a partner with government, but with all things that are well intended, sometimes they turn around to bite you a little bit. And I think there are some, with all due respect to them, who take advantage of 501c3 status or similar and try to seek tax exempt status on properties in the city with a continuing depleting tax base. And we have to be a little bit more smarter in that respect. And so it's very intelligent, as far as I'm concerned, and I believe it's the opinion of some of my colleagues as well, that we give some real consideration or at least provide some more scrutiny on what's been past practices for selling mass amounts of property to nonprofits, oftentimes with due respect to them, some of them small and not having capacity for development. And so you have lots and land and almost dilapidated housing structures that these organizations can't even pay for. And they'll end up probably back in front of us at some point anyway, to be quite frank. The other thing, council attorney, this has been an issue of mine, and this is no shot to the administration, but you can't really scream separation of powers when we have to depend on the same attorneys that are ultimately managed out of one office. It's my perspective, and I believe the perspective of my colleagues, that we need to establish a common counsel law office, if you will, that will obviously be occupied by one person. But it's very necessary that the council has an attorney that can put legislation on the agenda. As it stands right now, our charter only allows for someone from the law department to vet legislation to be put on the agenda. And there's been quite the debate about that over the years, but when I read it, that's what it says. So even if we contracted with an outside attorney, our corporation counsel still has to vet it to put it on. And that's problematic because in some instances, and this not with this administration, but certainly in the previous administration, I know one piece of legislation I tried to get on, and it took 1.5 years for it to get on the agenda. And so the legislature should not have to wait, because understandably the law department is backed up with a lot of work, but we often are caused. We're the lawmakers, but we're often caused to wait to put laws on the agenda because they have backed up work from the administration. And so that's been a problem, I think, obviously before many of us has gotten here, but it's something that we need to deal with. The other thing, relative to the recreational use of embalming fluid, when myself and the president first got elected, one of our first priorities and the very first thing we did was call a meeting with state delegates and the like to talk about recreational use of embalming fluid. Nobody moved. This is a issue that primarily affects communities of color. The opioid epidemic, which is indeed an epidemic, caught a lot of attention for other reasons. Meanwhile, the spike in violence in 2013 and years prior was directly related to dissociation as a result of use of embalming fluid that's laced with PCP. You know, and we made arguments before that we would see a lot of increased mental health issues because of the formaldehyde that is in the embalming fluid. And, you know, there's a lot of people walking around downtown right now with dissociation. And it's become quite the problem that, you know, we can't figure out ways to get our arms around. When we did that meeting, CPEP from St. Joe's was there and argued vigorously the fact that this needed to be taken care of way back then. If you speak to police officers, they'll tell you that oftentimes it takes 4 and 5 officers to control one person that might have been under the influence of embalming fluid. And what they do is they dip cigarettes and marijuana in them and smoke them. This is a problem across the country, but nobody's talking about it. Last thing I'll say in that respect, we had a meeting with the former Attorney General, Eric Schneiderman, to talk about the fact that we need to look at making this, getting his support to push the feds to make it a Schedule A narcotic. What qualifies the key thing, and I'll end here on this, that makes a substance a Schedule A narcotic is when it has no known medical benefits. Embalming fluid is used post-mortem. I don't think we need to say any more about that. So to myself, and I think to many of the councilors here, this is a lot of these items are no-brainers, and I think that, you know, while they may not speak to only city operations, it speaks to issues, as the president said, that many people have voiced concerns about for a long time.
And if I could, I want to piggyback on top of President Pro Tem and talk about the public officers law, because I'm not sure how many people are aware that we're working on a 1946 law that was put in place by New York City. And when you talk about police and fire, we're not Manhattan. And so police and fire, I don't think it'll be a real struggle for them to find decent housing in the city proper. So we need to really change the course of that. I get it on why they did it in downtown Manhattan, but again, upstate cities, we don't suffer the same fate when it comes to our public officers.
If I can add to that, you know, just to be a little redundant here, it makes sense that, you know, public safety be allowed to live outside Manhattan because of the cost of living. But that was passed blanket across the state. When you talk to mayors in other cities across upstate, from Buffalo to Yonkers, they all make the same complaint, that they take a hit because of the lack of obligation for public safety to live in their cities.
Absolutely.
And so there is a discussion going on to seek a referendum to amend the Taylor Law, to that point, to separate upstate from downstate as it relates to that specific rule and obligate public safety to live in the city like everybody else.
Does that involve teachers too?
It should, but that hasn't been a part of this discussion.
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, teachers are not exempt. The Syracuse
board can
School
make
Board
them
could
limits.
do that right now. The Syracuse City District School Board could make it a rule that all teachers would have to reside in the city. They're not exempt by the state law. And there's been conversation in the school board before about requiring that, and it's never gained enough political will to pass through the school board.
And
That's
to be
correct.
fair about it, it is political will, but you have to think about it. The teachers are negotiated. So you're talking about a negotiation with their union
Yeah.
to enable them to have to live in the city. So it's a negotiated thing.
And just that Councilor Bay and I believe Councilor Hudson remember, we sent over 2 resolutions to that effect
3.
last time I was on 3 resolutions. Thank you for correcting me. Last time I was on the council
That's right.
to the school board.
Going back to the council attorney, how much are you planning on putting in the budget for our council attorney?
Well, as it stands, we usually get about 45. Well, they try to reduce it to 40, but we're going to put it back at 45 for outside attorney. You know, I'm not afraid of a new attorney that's looking for opportunity coming to work for the city, and that's in the city. That's about where they start, about 45, if I'm not mistaken. But I think you know, one, we already budget for the money anyway, and it's often not used, by the way. You know, but two, the more important thing is the fact that it's needed. You know, the struggle for legislators to be effective because they can't get items on the agenda. And let's be clear, our primary responsibility is to write legislation. Second to that is only to approve and accept the budget for the city and the school district. That's it. There's no enumerated parts to our job description. And the main part of our job we struggle to do in large part, and there's no blame to any of the persons that's here, but it's just an old structure. And that exists for whatever reason, but we need to change it. You know, you go to any other level of government, and the legislature has their own attorneys to put their legislation on the agenda. And that's, you know, we should operate the same way.
So going back to the public officers law, the fire department has a residency requirement, right?
5 years, new hire.
It's an agreement.
That's negotiated. So basically, you know, there's, as Councilor Hudson pointed out, you know, with the union, that was something they voluntarily agreed to, rather than it being, you know, something that we could put in as a requirement at the city level. You know,
And let's be clear, we're not in any way disillusioned that we can pass that law. It would require a referendum, which will require a certain amount of signatures across the state to get that on the ballot for a general election. So it'll take a lot of other people, which I believe they exist, certainly in upstate New York, to make the effort to get that on the ballot.
Senator Gillibrand wasn't aware, so she said she went with me.
yeah.
Yeah, it would have to be state.
I know, you know, we've probably gone over it, but the independent district thing, who is gonna be the panel? Because that's one of the things that the county will say, well, whoever you put on there is gonna be partisan.
Well, no, that's not true, because when you talk about independent redistricting, we can't say who the panel is going to be, because we're actually accepting resumes once we put forth the enabling legislation. And once we put that forth, we're talking about, we're not just going to say, ooh, they're going to be all Dems. We're going to have Dems, we're going to have Republicans. I'm looking to push independent, working family, and whoever, because it needs to be truly independent. So we can't say who the parties are going to be.
I think one thing, though, we're not disillusioned about is human fallacy exists, right? And so, you know, but this is where, to the president's point, you attempt to create some balance. You know, in one way or another, people are either affiliated or non-affiliated, but they still have political ideology, to your point. But I think if you provide enough balance, you get a fair enough response from the group, because it still will take a majority vote, if not a unanimous vote, for the document to be accepted.
Okay, so the council is gonna vote on who the final panel is?
The council,
We get a chance to
Yeah, we-
say nay to folks,
Right.
and we get a chance to say yes to
Yeah,
folks.
yeah.
So we have that ability, but once the commission is put together, the redistricting is gonna be in their hands.
yeah, he was just talking about the appointment.
Yeah, and part of it that Council President Hudson worked on, I mean, so it starts out with the auditor chooses like 60 of the most qualified people. From there, people get randomly chosen out of a hat. And then from there, the people that are randomly chosen choose some of the other ones. The council the council only gets the next one person, you know, each. So it's not a council-driven process by any means. It's a citizen-driven process. That's luck and other citizens choosing it. It's not a political process.
It sounds like the city auditor's somewhat driving it too.
No,
The city auditor chooses the initial
he
resumes.
chooses it. He's not driving it,
Yeah.
but he has no real stake in this. So he has opportunity to take the resumes in, and from there, he starts disseminating them.
Do citizens have to vote on it? The independent redistricting?
They did that in November.
Okay.
Yeah, that was Proposition 1, Proposition 1 the last year, yeah. And it received overwhelming support.
75%, yay.
And then the other part of it too, I mean, you can't be related to anyone that's in political office. You're banned from running yourself if you
Yes.
serve on the
That's
committee. So it really takes out all the potential
Yes.
avenues for people
And
playing
it's a
games. with it.
5-year ban, so you can't run for 5 years if you sit on the redistricting commission.
I've been covering the council for a few years, and never seen the council come out with a written, produced agenda like this. Why now? Why haven't we done this before?
Well, I have two witnesses up here who will tell you I've been lobbying for this since I got here in 2012, technically. Councilor Hogan, who I call illustrious, and our council president will tell you I've made this argument every single time I showed up in the building, and so will Jim Conroy, because I would complain to him in his office about the fact that we haven't done it. The bodies, the people
Bodies.
involved.
We
You know,
attempted.
You,
We
you have,
attempted
you have
for
people.
several
You have
years.
people involved who see the logic. Who, and no discredit to anybody who's been here before. I think sometimes habit and conditioning has a major effect on how people do. And in government, we have a lot of established custom, and custom is often mistaken for the rule. And so what you had, I think, in this body is a lot of independent people who understood the logic, who came in with the intent to do work in a different way, and so it made it a lot easier to kind of organize everybody. And I think the inclusive discussion, obviously, is key. You have a legislative agenda where everyone up here contributed in some way, to the ideas that were important to their constituents specifically, or ideas that they, even as constituents, thought was good for the city. And so I think, I don't know if anybody else has a comment to that effect,
got
but
some.
I'm certainly happy with this group and the fact that we finally got it done.
And before you go, Cho, let me just say, you asked why now, because I'm gonna go back to Councilor Bay and President Hogan. Councilor Hogan.
Got promoted. All
I'd be
right.
the youngest guy running.
We had attempted to put together a legislative agenda for a couple years, and we just never got it off the ground. And so now we're actually able to move it forward. And I think it's basically beneficial for everybody, because now the community knows what we're working on and where we stand, and we're all on the same page, and I think that's phenomenal. So now we're here in 2020, even though we tried it in 2012, President Hogan.
And I think one thing, well, no comment. So
Oh,
one thing that I think,
well, her parents are sick.
she has a family
So
interest.
she has a
One thing that I think has to be understood, though, because when oftentimes things are considered, the legislature, and the executive, and what you're simply looking at or hearing about is the will of the legislature. It's not in consideration or in opposition to anything else. When you talk about legislative priorities, these are things that we think need to be done. So it's not anti in any direction for anybody, but when you talk about an effort to make the city better, it's necessary, as far as I'm concerned, that the legislature show some will. And that's why I give a lot of credit to the legislators up here, because they were fearless in that respect. And because of it, I think we'll get a lot done.
Yeah, I just want to say this, Chris, that I think what Madam President and President Pro Tem are saying basically summarize where we stand and how we feel, and generally we understand why we have three branches of government. Is pretty much clear, and it hasn't really been clear practically, and it's time. It's time to make it happen. So it took long, but we are here and we are going forward with it.
You have a question, young sir?
With Syracuse being one of the first cities in the nation to implement 5G, do you think that this will affect the city's economy and housing situation?
It will absolutely affect the economy, and I'm gonna let our economic share speak to that, because it will bring jobs to folks that were jobless before. So, and it'll actually boost our business up with 5G to businesses, but I'm gonna give that to my economic chair.
I appreciate it, and then I'm going, as soon as I finish talking, I'm going to pass it over to Councilor Green, who was heavily involved in the initial discussion on 5G here. Obviously, it does a lot in terms of our ability to function. I know I've had some specific acts to JMA when we met with them out at their facility, which is a phenomenal facility.
Yeah, it is.
But from job creation to our capacity for functioning business and operations and the like, is the potential is great. And some, a number of us had very warranted health concerns. Now, here's the thing that's funny. because one company I won't mention stood in here and told us there was no health concerns. But when we spoke to JMA Wireless, they made it absolutely clear that it depends on how close you are to it. If you're within 5 feet, you will get sick, which is why they placed them so high up in the air. So, I appreciate their, candor in that respect, because they were honest where other people weren't. But this is obviously a great opportunity for our area, and we have so much going on in terms of tech improvement that, I look forward to it. It can't happen fast enough. I'm going to slide it over to Councilor Green, though.
Bless you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most exciting part of it is that it signals Syracuse kind of being on the cutting edge of something for the first time. You go back over the last 50 years or so, and we've been very reactive to all the economic trends. And this is us signaling to the larger economy that Syracuse is getting out in front of what's coming next. So if you're looking to have a company that's looking to hire, Syracuse would be a good place to do it.
All righty. Well, thank you for that. And before everybody leave, I just want to say this. I would like for everybody to take a little time of remembrance, because yesterday we lost one of our former colleagues, which was Tommy Sills. And I just want to, take a moment to reflect and honor our councilman, Mr. Sills.
And former police officer.
And former police officer and former military. He did a lot of service to the city of Syracuse, and I want to just respect and honor him.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for coming, everyone.